Welcome to Front Office Pros. I'm Steve, and I'm here with Dustin today to talk about the hottest name possibly in Dynasty fantasy football right now. That's quarterback Daniel Jones. He just had a historic, well, no, it's not historic, but that's hyping it up. But he had a really good game against the Vikings in the Super Wild Card round. Dustin, is Daniel Jones good?
Daniel Jones is okay, in my opinion. Now, he was QB9 this year. He had 3,200 yards, 15, but he only had 15 touchdowns, 5 interceptions. The bulk of his fantasy points came from rushing. He had 120 attempts, 708 yards, and 7 touchdowns rushing. To me, I just don't see that rushing staying. This was a huge jump. Normally, he's around 60 carries a year, around 300 to 400 yards, and 2 or 3 touchdowns. So if you take half of his points away this year, from half those rushing points away, he goes from QB9 to QB15, which is where I think he's at. I think he's in that middling range of QBs. I also don't know if the Giants can continue to rush this way. John Feliciano, their center, is really good. He's a free agent. Nick Gates, who plays left guard, is really good, going to be a free agent. The rest of the line's good, but if you're starting to add 2 or 3 new pieces in this year, I'm not sure they can sign both those guys with having to sign Daniel Jones and Saquon Barkley. What that does to the chemistry. If he's not behind probably one of the best offensive lines in football, will he have the rushing attempts? I also don't see a lot of designed rushing plays for Daniel Jones in that offense. It seems like it's more of him breaking down, probably due to lack of good receivers. Now, they should add a receiver in free agency or draft, and that should increase his passing a little bit. But Daniel Jones isn't out there throwing 30 touchdowns. Like, he's throwing 15. He might get to 20 next year if they have a good receiver. I like Isaiah Hodgins, but I don't think he's a 1. So if he's throwing more, that means he's running less, which really takes away a lot of his fantasy points and brings him back down to that middle tier QB 15. I think at best he might be a QB 12 next year. I just can't buy the hype right now where he's going in the top 10, sometimes even higher in dynasty drafts. Steve, what do you think about Daniel Jones?
Yeah, the thing is, it's funny. In the open, I said that it was historic, but I cut myself back. But actually, looking back though, Dustin, it was historic. He was the first quarterback in NFL history, so that's historic, to have 300 passing yards, 2 passing touchdowns, and at least 70 rushing yards in a playoff game. So technically, technically historic. And so when you think about it, against the Vikings. So that's the thing where I feel what you're saying, that's where I'm having my hesitation. The Vikings were one of the worst teams defense-wise in the NFL. They let up the second most amount of passing yards. So Daniel Jones, I mean, yes, he got sacked 3 times, but really he didn't have that much coming at him. He had 301 passing yards, 2 touchdowns, 78 rushing yards. So, and I hear what you're saying, but I think when you think about Daniel Jones, you're saying he can only maybe in that 12 or 15 range, but this past season, with the lack of weapons that he had, he was the 9th best quarterback this year. So he was already a QB1 in this season with what supporting cast around him. So he had the most passing yards he's ever had, most rushing yards he's ever had at 708 with 7 rushing touchdowns, which is way more than he's ever had. I think with watching that game, it felt like you were watching a different Daniel Jones. And if that production is repeatable next season, you're talking about him taking a ginormous leap forward. The question is it the Vikings and is it repeatable? The benefit is he's got a great coach with Brian Daboll. A lot of people are making the comparison to Josh Allen, which I think is unfair. Yes, they have similar size. They're both 6'5", roughly around the same weight. And even if you look at their 40 times, roughly around the same speed. So pretty similar, but they're not the same arm talent wise. I think the question is, the Giants will have to bring in a receiver. I think as a Bills fan, you as a Bills fan as well, the reason why Josh Allen took that leap was because of Stephon Diggs. I'm not saying that he, maybe that would have happened otherwise, but him being there helped his development immensely. Can the Giants bring a receiver, probably not the caliber of Diggs, but at least a bona fide wide receiver 1 to help propel him to that next level? And that's the question I think I'm going back and forth on in my mind.
And outside of trading for one, there's not one available in free agency. Maybe in the draft, but they're not going to have a high draft pick because they're in the playoffs, they're in the divisional round. So they're going to have to trade for one. I don't know if they have the draft capital to go get, someone like a Diggs like the Bills did. I just don't see how you can go 1 year of 120 rushes when he had 45, 65, 62 the years before, basically doubled all of his rushing stats, that's attainable and repeatable. I think he comes down next year. I think his touchdowns can go up to 20, from 15 to 20. His interceptions probably stay under 10 or around 10, which is not bad. But I think that rushing comes back down to 400 yards and maybe 4 touchdowns. Right, and that's a huge drop in production, especially with the way fantasy scoring works with rushing for quarterbacks. It's measured just like every other rushing. So it's 10 yards per rushing yards, or 10 points per 10 rush, or 1 point per 10 rushing yards. If he cuts those productions in half, like I said, he goes from the QB9 to QB15. And I think if you're buying him right now or hoping that he can repeat QB9, I think you're going to be disappointed. We also saw a really bad year from Russ, so he wasn't in the top 10. We saw guys like Trey Lance not play because he was injured. Like, guys with high rushing upsides are still there. I just don't see a top 10 performance repeatable for Daniel Jones.
Yeah, I think for me, one of the things I will be looking into further in this offseason was the Giants declined his 5th-year option. To me, that's a tall tale. I think the Giants as a team overachieved from what they expected. You don't decline someone's 5th-year option if you don't. It's a bargain for the team. There's no reason why they would do that if they didn't believe in the player. So Joe Shane and Brian Dable coming in their first year, that's a big statement for them to decline it. Now, Daniel Jones has risen through the adversity, and he has had a really good season. And based on the reports that we're hearing, all indication is they are planning on re-signing him. The thing I'm curious about is, what does that re-signing look like? I'm thinking it's a short-term deal, possibly even a franchise tag. So it's a short-term deal. That's telling me they're not even fully sold on him, because if they were, they would give him a 5-6 year deal, and break the bank. Now, he didn't necessarily, the stats don't necessarily, I think, make it that it's worth that for him to do it. But that to me is the cause for concern. If you're going to trade a bunch of capital to be able to get a guy who you want to be a quarterback that you can build around in your dynasty roster, and there's a lot of question marks right now when it comes to Daniel Jones. This is a very interesting window, Dustin, because he's going up against the Philadelphia Eagles, which is a much tougher defense.
Yes.
If he continues on this pace and he does what he did against the Vikings with what he's going to do with the Eagles, he might start changing my mind. Because now you're talking about the Giants going to the conference championships, beating the best team in the NFC with the Eagles. That's a big statement. But if he comes back down to earth, this window of him being hot, it just got doused with water. He's not hot anymore.
Plus, if he were to beat the Eagles, that just, in terms of the contract negotiating, that just gives him more leverage. So are the Giants willing to pay up for someone who gets the team to the conference championship? Or is he going out there and finding a deal with Houston or the Raiders or all these teams that are QB needy? Like, his value just goes up and he's got all the leverage then. Can the Giants do it with the salary cap to get him and Barkley both in? Or at some point does his production on the field price him out of the Giants' range and the Giants have to look elsewhere? It's a hot market for QBs right now in terms of teams. Like, we know Tampa Bay might be looking for someone. We know the Raiders are looking for someone. Think Houston's looking for someone. Lamar's done in Baltimore. There's a lot of openings, and Daniel Jones is just playing himself into a bigger contract. Whether that contract's with the Giants or with someone else remains to be seen. That's another huge question mark for him, because if he's not with the Giants, does that production repeat if he's not there?
Now, that's a hot take when it comes to Lamar being done in Baltimore. That might be for another video, but I'll ask you this.
Done.
I'll ask you this. Okay, so would you rather have, so I'll give you 3 players here, right? Would you rather have Daniel Jones or Trey Lance?
I think I'd take Trey Lance. Even given the question marks with him and Brock Purdy, I still think Trey Lance gets a shot. He has a rushing upside, which is what you're counting on with Daniel Jones anyway. If it's a straight up trade, I'd taking a little bit more youth there in Trey Lance, and I like that upside from a talent wise. We don't think of Daniel Jones as a rushing quarterback. We do with Trey Lance. So I want a guy that's considered a rushing quarterback. Plus, on that team, if Brock Purdy can be this good, Trey Lance should be this good on that team, just the way that team's built.
Yeah, I'm taking Lance too, especially with the infrastructure they have in San Francisco. They have a ton of weapons. He has that dual threat ability. It's just a question of whether or not he can retain the starting job, which I think he could. And I actually think, depending on your league, you may be able to get Trey Lance. You may be able to sell Daniel Jones for Trey Lance plus, because that owner could be really panicked on Trey Lance. Okay, next player. How about Tua? Would you take Tua or would you take Daniel Jones?
With my Dolphins bias aside, this is where I would take Daniel Jones. I like Tua. Obviously, I like his weapons in Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle. I worry about the health. I worry about the concussions, and that long-term effect. And if Tua can stay healthy, Tua has yet to have a season where he's healthy. So I would take Daniel Jones, but it's really close, and I wouldn't fault anybody for choosing either side of that.
Yeah, that's the tough one for me. I feel like I like Tua better as the player and the potential, and I tend to be a risk taker. So I feel like I end up would go with Tua. But like I said, like you mentioned, I wouldn't blame you. Daniel Jones is definitely the safer option of the two. We'll go with the last one here. What about Russell Wilson? He had a bad season, but he's been prototypically one of the best quarterbacks going.
Currently, right now, as it sits today, with Daniel Jones not being signed, I'm taking Russ. I believe in the talent there. I believe in what I've seen. Yes, this year was bad, but I'm a person who one bad season is an outlier. And conversely, one good season, Daniel Jones is an outlier. The talent is there in Denver with Jerry Jeudy, with Courtland Sutton. Russ has proven it. He even picked it up the last 4 games of the season. I'll take Russ, even though he is older in my Dynasty league to start. If I'm doing a Dynasty startup draft, I'm probably taking Russ a few rounds later than Daniel Jones. But if I'm in a existing Dynasty league, 1 quarterback, 2 quarterbacks, and I can make that trade straight up, I probably want more for Daniel Jones, but I would want to have Russ.
Yeah, I could be wrong about this, but I think I'd rather have Russ as well. I chalk it up as Nathaniel Hackett being a very bad head coach. I thought he was going to be bad. I don't wish, anyone to be bad, but I remember him as the offensive coordinator with the Bills with Doug Marrone, and I was like, this guy is not good. And he ended up being like an Adam Gase 2.0 with a recommendation from a Hall of Fame quarterback. And then he came in and did nothing. So I think he'll turn it around. So at the end of the day, Dustin, are we saying that would you recommend selling him, or are you holding on to him?
I would sell. I don't think that rushing production is repeatable. With the question marks on offensive line, with the question marks around his quarterback contract, questions with his receiver, even if they bring in a guy, even if they could trade for a Deontay Johnson or get someone like that, I just don't see it happening. I don't see a lot of wide receivers out there. So there's too many question marks for me, and I just don't think it's repeatable. His touchdowns would have to go up considerably to match the production that he's going to lose in running. So I'm selling high right now, especially if he wins this weekend. I think it's going to be an all-time high. And I would easily take a late first, even an early second for Daniel Jones.
Yeah,
in most leagues, depending on your league settings.
Yeah, I'm with you. And my Dynasty league, I'm in a deep league. So, quarterbacks are definitely valuable. And for me, at the end of the day, I would sell him as well. Because a lot of the reasons we mentioned. And I think the big thing for me is with Saquon Barkley there, this offense runs through him. So I feel like as a result, his upside is somewhat limited because you're dealing with a running back that gets a lot of volume. So as a result, will you ever see Daniel Jones as a top 5 quarterback in a given season? I don't see it. And so that could be a strategy for people. You can not have that elite guy. But for me, I would rather pass on him. So that is our synopsis of what we feel about Daniel Jones. If you have any questions about what you should do with him, are you on the fence about selling or buying him, go ahead and put your comments below. We're happy to give you our advice about what you should do. If you like this content, we ask you to please subscribe. We're going to be doing some more Dynasty content in the future. So thanks so much for watching, and until next time.